Good morning. Good morning again. Welcome to Brighter Morning with Bhoe on MCTV and U97.5. And this morning, because we have a special interview with the Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. the Honourable Keith Rowley, we have teamed up with TTT, and we thank the Prime Minister for facilitating this process. So, good morning, Prime Minister. Are you on?
Good morning, Bhoe. Good morning, Brighter Morning viewers.
Yes. Thank you very, very much, Prime Minister. I know you have a busy schedule, and I know you have a lot of things to do, and I want to thank you very much for agreeing to this conversation this morning.
I must thank you. It's part of my schedule here, so I hope we can have as much time as you need. And I'm very happy to be here on this.
Yes, and we welcome you. We welcome you warmly, and we are going to engage the issue of independence. We are going to look backwards a little bit. We're going to try to assess what is happening now and let you speak about it. But we are also going to look at the future, because everybody is concerned about what is likely to happen beyond this COVID pandemic. And let me ask you a question that is with the population now to start. Who needs a state of emergency, and why do we need it?
Oh, I think the people of Trinidad and Tobago need a state of emergency at this time for the specific reason that we are fighting a virus that jumps from person to person in the air. And the best response to that situation is to reduce the interactions between people. And what the state of emergency does, it, under the force of law, encourages people to stay put a bit. While we come out in the daytime and get about our jobs and our chores and whatever, the period of time that we reduce our interaction from approaching 9 o'clock when they get home to the family and so on, and stay there until daybreak, we reduce that interaction. And that is one way of the population preventing the virus from spreading as easily as it would spread otherwise.
But people will say that, I mean, you still have the interaction during the day. What is so special about 9 p.m. or the night that you want to prevent people gathering together? I mean, and one of the issues, of course, is during the day people interact, both vaccinated and unvaccinated. So what is so special that you need a state of emergency to prevent people from gathering in the evening?
It is not that the night is more infectious than the day. It is that we accept that even with the risk of the virus, we have to come out in the daytime to do the things that people do. You would have seen the amount of calls for the opening up of this and the opening up of that, so that people largely in the daytime will go and do these things for their livelihood. So we have to do that. We literally, ideally, we'd like to just sit in one place until the virus has died and gone. But because we have to do those things that we do in the daytime, what we do is give the nighttime interaction to reduce the space of time, the length of time that we are interacting. And you must bear in mind that when to have a 9 o'clock curfew, people stop moving around or going to places that they would otherwise have gone all about 6, 7 o'clock to be able to be complying with the 9 o'clock curfew. So we do that, giving up the things that we would do at night to be able to do the things that we have to do in the daytime. That's really what it is.
All right. Prime Minister, how do you feel about imposing a state of emergency a few days before independence? I mean, the spirit of independence is one of freedom and responsibility, yes, but freedom most of all. How do you feel about doing that? Does it bother you that you have to do it now?
Um, the independence timing is not really a consideration. The bigger concern was to shut off the spread of the virus. And I think we'd be more independent if we are alive than if we are damaged by the virus. So it's not the best thing to do because we deprive ourselves of the celebrations and the reflections of the independence and so on. But we can still do that while we are parading. And so it affects how we normally would do things at independence. But from a point of view of it being an indication of the loss of that independence and the trampling upon freedoms, and so I don't think that we are too bothered by that because we are not really doing that. What we do is responding to a spreading virus.
Okay, so some people might say that, look, you are taking away our freedom in this state of emergency and you are giving us nothing in return. We can't go to the beaches, we can't have a drink in the bar, we can't even sit down in a restaurant and have a meal. What would you say to that?
Well, the government is taking that away. That's true. I mean, members of the government, we are missing that too. But I think that argument is incomplete until you look at what am I giving you? We're giving you an opportunity to survive a dangerous situation. And if you want to know how much that opportunity is valued, you go to the hospital in Cuba and have a peep inside there, or talk to the people who suddenly lost their loved ones because of the infection of the virus. So, yes, we are taking away some things, but we are giving you that golden opportunity, that very valuable opportunity to try and survive in a pandemic.
Okay, Prime Minister, we've got to take a quick break now. We'll be right back, and we'll be back in a moment, okay? Welcome back to Brighter Morning with Bhoe. Honourable Prime Minister, I'm going to take you to Parliament. You were in Parliament on Wednesday, and the state of emergency extension was passed. Were you surprised that the opposition abstained rather than voted against the state of emergency?
No, I wasn't surprised. I mean, the opposition makes its position very clear on all of these matters. In fact, there's an overriding position that the opposition has taken that they will support nothing that the government brings to the parliament. And that is usually their position. On this occasion, the opposition invested very heavily in trying to mobilize the population to resist and not cooperate with the extension of the emergency. There's a lot of political activity before, and it was all towards opposing it, even to come outside the parliament and demonstrate. So the vote was not surprising.
Okay. In Parliament on Wednesday, you praised the writers of the Constitution for the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Yet on some occasions, you have criticized parts of the Constitution. Talk to the population a little bit about the Constitution and what you like and what you don't like.
Well, I wasn't praising the Constitution in its totality. I was praising it for having, in this context, where it allows the government to govern,
Yes.
even if there might be strong other views. The government has to make decisions, and sometimes when a decision is unpopular, the expression of the lack of support could give the impression that there is no support for it. And the Constitution allows the government margin to govern. Otherwise, we would not have been able to extend the emergency in this case because it was pretty clear to us that the opposition would have taken the opportunity, reasonable, logical, or otherwise, to not support the bill. They would find a reason not to support the bill. And in that case, the government would have been wanting to do something for the country and would not have been able to. So a certain amount of margin is allowed for 180 days for the government to do that. And to the extent that it curbs the government's power, after that time, the government must then convince the opposition somehow to do it or to stop doing it. So there are parts of the Constitution that I have some serious difficulty with. I think some parts of it have outlived its usefulness. And for me, the biggest problem there in having chosen the Westminster model as our parliamentary model, we then hamstrung it with those service commission arrangements that were not really part of the British model that we tried to copy, but we were afraid of the authority that we were being given, and we put a lot of strictures around it. And it did provide comfort to people who were going into independence in 1962. But by the time you look at what's happening now with the service commissions as management um, tools in the country, they're really outmoded because they're contrary to all aspects of good management. And the opportunity to change that requires some significant consensus, which is not, especially in the current political climate that we've been living in. I don't see that we could change that very quickly or very easily. But in the meantime, we suffer from not being able to being using best practice in management.
Is constitution reform on your agenda under your watch?
Not in the forefront because for a start, I would think that we're not going to get any cooperation from the opposition. So one could try, but if you know the outcome, you don't waste too much time with that. And secondly, I don't know that um, many people share my view that it is something like that to be done overnight. It requires consistent national appreciation of the difficulties. And then there has to be some building up of an agreement that we need to change these things. I'm sure other people have other adjustments that they want to make. And from time to time, we do make some amendments to the Constitution. But maybe the time has come for us to look at it in a holistic way without rancor and see whether we can improve our circumstance.
Okay, you think you're likely to take any initiative on that at all during your watch?
Um, I We tend to want to do it in increments, but I'm here talking about a larger exercise. We are currently engaged in local government reform, and you see how much support there is for that. I'm happy to say that um, maybe next month, as we go towards Republic Day, we would be elevating Diego Martin and Siparia to borough status. That's an improvement in that administration incrementally. But for the national constitution, I think we need a review. And we have been so tied down with other, putting out other fires that has
Yes,
not yet.
necessities.
So it's
Okay.
not really on the front burner for the immediate, but I think it is that we must keep our eyes on. And if we can engage in it, we will.
Now, the whole business of the Constitution is one that many people have argued that it's a kind of top-down Constitution and it vests a lot of power in the executive, whichever executive presides. Would you consider yourself a leader who uses this executive power provided by the Constitution? And would you say that you are an authoritarian leader, or do you think that, would you say that you have dictatorial instincts as a leader?
I would think that that's a waste of time in trying to paint that on me because I've been prime minister of this country for 6 years. I have used no power and authority that other prime ministers have not used. I have claimed no power and no authority other than what is there and have been used and left there by other prime ministers. There were two prime ministers who governed this country, one with every seat in the parliament, one with 20, I think 27 seats in the parliament. And the same things I use as the basis for the actions I take are what they use. So I don't know how I, with 22 seats in the parliament, can be accused of assuming or claiming a power which is the same that the prime minister with 36 seats or to 27 seats use. And no, I don't know what action you can point to that I have carried out in this country that can be genuinely called the action of a dictator. Of course, my political opponents and those who are perpetual failures in the political arena, they would describe me in terms that are unflattering. But that doesn't faze me because I know that there's no basis for any such thing.
Yeah, I, 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 I must commend you on the calmness of your answer, because I think one of the things that might provoke people to accuse you of this is that sometimes you can be very passionate, hot under the collar, in which if you express a view or if you take on an opponent, you think that contributes to the view of you by some that you might be authoritarian in personality.
Yeah, but um, even before I got into prime minister's position, you would find there are voices that don't agree with my style. But I'm nothing if I'm not respectful, if I am not open. I say things as I see them. I don't sugarcoat things for people. And I think some people have a difficulty with that. But in terms of reasonable assessment from people who do not have agendas, um, I am quite comfortable with my image and my own behavior. I know that the political opponents, it is not their job to paint me as acceptable to what they would like to see. And in fact, quite a number of people in the political arena who have difficulty getting noticed. And they try to paint me in what they would have liked me to be. But unfortunately, that is their description, and I don't really blame them for that. If that's the best way they can advance their agenda, fine. But I think the average person in Trinidad and Tobago see me not as copying anybody's style or trying to be what I am not. And with me, what you see is what you get. And I am open and I am pragmatic.
Okay, so you think that you are authentic in that sense? Just a yes or no answer.
Very much so, very much so.
Okay, I'm going to ask you something about democracy now, because I paid attention to the debate on the state of emergency extension. And when you were speaking, you mentioned the issue of freedom with restraint in the parliament. Is democracy important to you then? And what else, besides freedom with restraint, is an important consideration for you in democracy as we go forward to 60 years of independence?
Well, the singular most important aspect of democracy as a governing tool for a population is participation. A lot of people speak about democracy without paying attention to that participation. And how does one participate in a democracy? If one goes back to the history and the evolution of the concept of democracy, you will see that there were times when the participation was wider, broader, more emotional, and with more serious consequences, and by the same token, um, accepted with some reverence. And my concern in our country is that we can have more participation, and that participation can be more genuine and reasonable, and then democracy thins down to being the will of the majority and the respect for the minority. So there are two views juxtaposed, and we take it from there. But I'm a Democrat. I believe in the concept. I think of as I think it was Winston Churchill who said, democracy is not perfect, but it's better than all the others. So I think that's the approach that I would like to take.
Do you think that Trinidad and Tobago society is too undisciplined and unruly? Do you have that view?
The broad brushing could make some people feel that we are unfairly targeting them. I would say that there is um, a huge component of indiscipline in our country, and in fact, such that we identify it and claim it as who we are. I think we can overdo that a bit. Yes, if that's who we are, we need to look at the consequences of doing it or of not improving on that. Um, I wouldn't say we're unruly. If you look at what amazes me is the level of discipline that causes a steel band to function. You go into a panyard and see what goes on there to allow people, many of whom don't know music, but can be in a short space of time guided to produce symphony of music without too much difficulty. And that discipline is there, but sometimes needs to be harnessed. And we go abroad and we fit in very quickly in other people's disciplined arrangement. So it tells me that we are disciplined and we have the capacity for discipline. But in Trinidad and Tobago, we claim the right to be indisciplined and even promote it as culture.
Yeah, so, some people might say that you would consider the population as undisciplined and unruly because you quarrel and admonish the population from time to time on certain things, and even that steel band example that you make, that you propose, you know, in the steel band, I mean, it's not so much self-discipline as discipline by either the captain or the leader of the band. When that guy comes and he hits the side of the pan and he says, okay, everybody get in order and let's start. It's a kind of semi-military discipline in the panyard, you know, for the business of playing.
Well, and that has its benefit, and I think the cooperation he gets from the band members is because the band members realize that I have to be ready to strike the note, otherwise we won't play this music. Panorama going to pass us by. So it's a buy-in by the people who stand or sit in the band to play, and the one who is leading knows what he can expect from them. And discipline, whether it is in the army, whether it's in the steel band, whether it's in the country, it requires guidance and that guidance to be followed. And I don't know that the band leader is a dictator, um, even if he does carry a hammer sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, in the House of Representatives, you mentioned that everybody is getting tired, and I think you captured the mood and feeling of the population by that, and that COVID has really stressed out everybody. Prime Minister, I want to ask you a question. It's not really a personal question because you are the Prime Minister and people need to know. Has this last year been especially hard for you? Has COVID kind of stressed you out as Prime Minister of the country?
I would say yes, because it's a frightening experience. Even before we had our first confirmed case, the coming of a virus that could be so devastating on lives and livelihood is something that one cannot switch off from. As leader of the country, all the effects of the infection of the population would constantly be on your mind. And every decision we're making now, especially it came at a time when we are strapped for resources. The period 2014 to 2019 December have been a very, very difficult period for this country. And then on top of that, you get the perfect storm of something that was not even on our horizon. That, and whatever else we were planning to allocate resources for, whatever other plans you have, what you have to address now is like a baby being born. It claims your attention and you have to keep it alive. We now are in that situation, and I don't know that I switch off from this night or day. And going into the second year, you must remember when we started out responding to this pandemic in March, in January, I must say, by March, we were actually taking action. And we were talking about, the experts were telling us maybe by September, June to September would be a period when we'll get this thing behind us. September, and some people are saying, September? So long? And then it began to dawn on us as we lived it that this thing is going to be with us all of 2020. And of course, we're looking into 2021, and now we are almost towards the end of 2021, and the pandemic is still our primary concern. So it is stressful to be in that situation on a 24-hour basis, and I hope that my physical and mental state and that of the country, that we can cope with it and exhale in the not too distant future.
Do you think that the continuation of the state of emergency might exacerbate some of the mental health problems for citizens under these conditions of, what can I say, restraint or closure or imposition of time, etc.? You think that the state of emergency can add to the severe mental stress of citizens?
I'm sure it does. As necessary as it is, we have to admit the experts tell us that. I mean, I read quite a lot about the effects of the pandemic on people at the personal level. And when one looks at our situation here, under normal situation, observed in any specific way, it just happens that families interact, and we don't really put a value on that in a conversation, that you're able to go and see your old aunt, see your sister, see your new niece, and so on. So the restrictions would have an effect on us by restraining us from doing the things that normally keep us sane. And those people who are mental health experts, they describe these the being denied these opportunities in the way that they affect us, even if we are not observing how it is affecting us. And let's take our school children who are home. It's abnormal for them not to be able to be in the schoolyard with their friends, and we are being warned about how that generation could be affected by not having this nurturing that we take for granted. But even so, we try to minimize those restrictions, and at the level of the cabinet, we put them there only as they are absolutely necessary, and we remove them as quickly as we could.
Okay, Prime Minister, we'll take a break now and we'll come back in 2 minutes. Welcome back. Prime Minister, straight to you. 59 years old, going on 60, I'll ask you two questions. What in the past 59 years is significant to remember? And secondly, what major opportunity have we missed that we must not ignore? This is not in your time. I'm talking about the period of 59 years of history.
Well, it has been quite a journey for us in that period. I mean, if one looks at it from where we've been, how we lived, and where we are today, I would say by and large we've made some considerable progress with restraint, if I use that word again. And one of the things that I would say that we missed the opportunity was to be better savers during the two periods of what we commonly call boom. We had two periods when we had a lot of money coming into the country. And what we did then, we made some significant improvements in the quality of life of people, and we built some significant infrastructure in the country. But the one thing that we didn't do then was to be more cognizant that if we had saved a bit more during that period, the period like the one we have now where we are short of revenue and we are able to save ourselves and tap into the savings that we made. Had we made more aggressive savings opportunities, then we would have been in a lot better position now. But I think persons without means, when they do get means, tend to be um, more profligate than normal. But if we look back on our earnings during the 70s boom and the 2005 to onward boom, we did create some savings, significant savings in the period leading up to 2009. And it is now paying huge dividends because those savings are made in the Heritage Fund, which is invested in the foreign market and mutual funds and so on. They pay some significant dividends. And you would observe that even as the Minister of Finance has taken out a significant amount of money from our Heritage Fund, that fund keeps earning in a way that should tell us that had we got a larger fund, a larger pool in that situation, then we would have been a lot better off. We also, I think, what we have missed is that we had not placed enough store on our value system. And simply, I want to say the old time days. We have given up a lot of very valuable traditions and have not replaced them with anything useful, and the vacuum exists, and especially for young people. Um, I'm worried that a lot of young people are growing up in this country without a full appreciation of the role of effort, the role of respect, the role of um, patience, being able to wait for the good thing to come to you. The quick fix and the instant gratification. Those are things that are very important to a society. And I'm worried that the values that we have thrown out in the freedom of, I don't want to say independence, in the freedom of building the nation, we have not replaced them with things that are worthy of, of our future as we aspire to that future.
Okay, so I just want to summarize quickly. Something to remember is that we've made fair progress, perhaps not as much as we wanted, but with restraint. Secondly, we missed the opportunity to save more during the oil booms. And thirdly, we may have created the conditions where a value system that helps a society and its people to be sustainable have somehow been lost and missed. Okay, I got you right?
Yes, absolutely.
I'll ask you two more questions. What is the most formidable challenge that we are facing today as a country? You are Prime Minister, you're seeing it from the top, you're seeing it with your ministers, you're seeing it from below, and we have this extra COVID situation. We've always had problems, but this COVID has made it worse. What is the most formidable challenge that we face in the country today?
The most formidable challenge, I would say, is the requirement to preserve the gains that we have made. We need to preserve gains that we have made, and to do so, we have to ensure that we can afford those gains. A lot of the gains we have made have been funded by a revenue stream that is now under threat. And the government of Trinidad and Tobago, being the custodian of the revenue stream from the hydrocarbon industry, has taken the country to a quality of life that is what we take for granted now, but understand that that is underpinned by a funding arrangement that is shrinking and disappearing. So we have that challenge of where are our revenue streams going to be, where the revenues are going to come from, and how can we sustain that in a way to preserve the lives that we now accept as a normal life in Trinidad and Tobago. And that to me is the biggest challenge that we face.
Yes. So the challenge really is, what is the new formula that we need to maintain our standard of living and quality of life?
Yes, sir.
All right. What is worrisome and what is hopeful about the future of Trinidad and Tobago?
Worrisome for me is that I don't think enough people take seriously the challenges that we are facing. And there's a certain amount of frivolity that is associated, even with the conversation, where the conversation exists. And that to me is the most worrisome thing, because it needs the society to appreciate its circumstance to be able to respond appropriately. And um, I don't think, are taking these things as seriously as we should, because a lot of it is absorbed in a blame game, um, which is accompanied by an entitlement. Many people speak of the situations in the context of, I'm entitled to have this, or I'm entitled to have that. And if you're not having it, it's somebody else's fault. And therefore, all I have to do is to find that somebody and beat them over the head, and my entitlement would be okay. And others are not wanting to engage it. But some people are doing that, and we need more of it. That too. We need to get serious on serious matters. For example, if I may mention this, the restructuring of Petrotrin is not the most pleasant experience for those who were directly affected, but the logic and the requirement to do it is there and is clear. But many people don't want to face up to the fact that this problem had to be addressed, and the way it had to be addressed was not be a painless way. And also, let us accept that the restructuring has evaded a precipice and put us on a pathway to sustainability, in at least in the medium term, and for as long as the output is what is required by the market. So if we are afraid to treat with the issues that have to be treated with, then we will postpone that attention, and that only worsens the situation.
Okay, what about the future? What is hopeful about the future? What do you give citizens to hang on to for the future?
That we are a relatively free society, and we are a society that has demonstrated time and time again that we have what it takes to rise to the occasion, and therefore that should give us hope that the challenges are not insurmountable. I have confidence in the people of Trinidad and Tobago to do what is required to save ourselves. And what we need to do are to make sensible choices and to be patient as these choices work for us.
All right. I want to shift gears a little bit and give you a sense of what some people are saying on the ground. Some people are saying that we are on the brink of a precipice economically, that we face the prospect of social disorder, that there's too much divisiveness in the society, that party politics is too antagonistic and disrespectful, and people are becoming alienated from it, that there's a kind of internal brain drain because talented people are not drawn into the mainstream of contribution in the society, and talented people are afraid to engage in anything near to politics because they think that they are going to be abused. How do you respond to things like that, which are real in terms of people's perceptions in this society?
I think there's some truth in all of what you have said there, but I don't think that they're overwhelming. The politics is an evolving thing and ought to take us from one level to another. The disrespect that is in that area, I think if there are consequences to that, it can be curbed. And I think the population can intervene from time to time, and as it does, but needs to be more rigorous in screening out people who are not contributing to the amelioration or removal of those impediments that you mentioned there in the political arena. And also, I don't know that we can say that we are at a precipice without accepting that if that is where we are, then we have to make responses that take us back from the brink. And we need to face the realities as we craft the responses. I don't feel hopeless in the Trinidad Tobago situation. We have difficulty ahead, and every country has difficulty. But one thing that is cheap to get rid of, but is very corrosive, is the divisiveness. That divisiveness has its root in our racial, religious history, and we need to stamp it out and become more all-embracing in this country and less hypocritical. We need to own this country. We need to cloak ourselves in that red, white, and black before we cloak ourselves in anything else. And we need to build institutions and allow them to function. Even as I said earlier on, that some of them are anachronistic. But we can't elevate the personal, the expense of institutions. And that's one of the things that's happening in this country, where institutions are not as strong or as supported or as supportable as they should be. And we need to replace that personal, like everybody is what from I shouldn't say everybody, but many people are the for me as against the institutional us. And those are the kinds of conversations we need to have in this country, and we
Prime
need to
Minister,
make that.
you know that issue of the divisiveness in the society and how to deal with it, and the issue of building formidable, sustainable, resilient institutions is a conversation that we could spend 2 hours on. So I will
Because
leave.
because we can spend 2 months on that.
Yeah, well, we'll leave that for now, but I will pursue it at some other time with you. And but I want to ask you this question. You know, yesterday you were out in the field, so to speak. You were opening a school, but you took the opportunity to talk about the contribution of women in the party. I want to ask you two
Party
questions.
in the party or in the country.
In the
In the
country,
country.
in the country. But you were talking about how women had risen to important posts in the country and that they were playing a significant role in the business of governance, really. And when you were doing that, two things crossed my mind. One is that you had said that this is probably going to be your point of exit from the politics. And secondly, I wondered if you were looking to a future leader of your party and therefore of government who was female. So address the two questions. One is this your last stint as leader of the party in power? And secondly, would you facilitate the evolution of the party and government to a situation in which you have a potential prime minister in the PNM who is a woman?
Well, let me just answer you as genuinely and as truthfully as I could. It never crossed my mind when I was making that statement that it had anything to do with the leadership in the PNM. So you could put that to rest because that was not even a thought when I made that. But of course, I could see why you or anybody else now looking at the statement now that could do that brilliant analysis and see what you think you see there. But it's not that at all. And secondly, um, I, I was simply pointing out or trying to point out the tempering of the decision making process which the mother brings to the household. I made the point of the ministers who were mothers of young children, especially at this time, and what they bring to the discussion and the management decision making is that input of the mother. You know, if you grow up, if you're familiar with a raucous house where there's vigor and there's argument and there's concern and disquiet, you know that motherly voice tends to calm and provide support. And I think that is what is happening at this time in our country, where we have so many women in positions of influence, because they bring that to the table of discussion. That's all it was. I am, and with respect to me being around, I'm sorry to say, Boo, I'll be around for a while,
Okay.
God willing.
Okay. So exit is not on the cards for you.
Not at this time. I'm not a lame duck prime minister.
All right. Excellent. Um, Straight answer, I would say. I want to shift you a little bit to finance and the economy. How is that?
That's
You
good.
know,
Let's
the
go.
IMF has embarked on a special distribution of drawing rights for countries across the globe. And they say that this is to help out with COVID-19. IMF is going to invest $650 billion in the global financial system to help countries to support themselves here. Trinidad and Tobago has received $644 million out of that. In the global financial crisis of 2009, the IMF injected US $250 billion, which was seen as a very big amount at that time. But the current amount is almost 3 times that. I want to ask you 2 questions. One about our country, but I'll leave that for second. The first question I want to ask you is that from your point of view, what does it mean that the IMF sees the COVID crisis as significant enough and troubling enough to put 3 times the money in the global system that they did in the financial system in 2009?
Well, Bo, take it in the context of, I grew up with my grandparents, right? And my grandmother always would say and calm me when you were worried about what is happening to you, that no matter how bad a situation is, it could easily have been worse. So take some comfort in that and go forward confidently. When we had the collapse in 2009 in the global financial crisis, everybody thought this was a melting down of systems and attitudes, and the future was at stake. And the intervention then to deal with that was dealing with a situation as bad as it was known or ever known. The fact that the IMF is now putting 3 times as much money to the system simply means that this pandemic has affected us 3 times as bad as
At
that global,
least. Yeah.
and it is so widespread and all pervasive. The global financial crisis basically was dealing with people who had money and was losing money, and those who didn't have had nothing to lose. And it was largely in that part of the world where there was a an impact or footprint of the Wall Street activities and it affected us here in Trinidad and Tobago, as you know, because we are connected in many ways there. But this pandemic affects everybody at every world, and it has a much larger damaging impact on the world's economies. And that is why the IMF has come in. I mean, when you read, like here in the CARICOM, some countries are pointing to a huge percentage loss in GDP. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, we are still trying to assess the extent of the loss of our GDP simply by being in this pandemic situation. If you look at what happened in the big economies of the world, how much hundreds of billions are lost in countries simply because of having to respond to the pandemic. I mean, here in Trinidad and Tobago, when we stayed home for a month, not going out to work, earning nothing, shutting down everything, you could imagine the effect that that is having and multiply that. And so the IMF has recognized, thankfully, that this is a crisis that is many times more devastating than the global financial crisis that we experienced in 2009. And we're very happy for the response. And our share of that support is going to be utilized much to our benefit.
What are you going to use it for, Prime Minister? You
We
know that amount, 644 million, is almost equivalent to the $50 million that the Minister of Finance said was spent on the pandemic. So you have been very fortunate in that sense.
Well, you know, there is, or from time to time, when one speaks of the IMF, one speaks about the ogre at the door. But on this occasion, I hope you understand that being a member of the IMF has its great benefit.
It always
Um,
did.
yes, it always did, but I'm saying in the conversation, when you speak about the IMF and going to the IMF, it can only mean bad things, right? But you asked what we'll use it for. It is mainly, we can use it mainly to strengthen our position going forward, encouraging export marketing, ensuring that we can fund the recovery that has to be done in a variety of ways, and it's it's going to prevent us from having to borrow as much as we would have had to borrow from other sources if we were without this kind of support. But it is going to be used to bolster the country's recovery position in a variety of ways. Um, too many to mention tonight, this morning, but you will be told along the way, and we'll be as open as possible with that.
The IMF has made all of these drawdowns available to countries because they know that countries are in trouble, and this is a special situation. Businesses have been complaining that they are in trouble, especially small and medium-sized businesses. Will any of this funding be used to help or support or rehabilitate or to get into new entrepreneurial businesses that deal with either import substitution or exports for local business?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're going to be using it for is to ensure that what we wanted to do and would have been funded by the scarce resources or the expensive resources we would have to find to, I mentioned a while ago, export marketing. We are going to have to support those who are engaged in that activity, and it would be whatever that is that could help us to get into the marketplace and to earn from that marketplace. It will also help us to provide that a number of businesses would have used up their resources that would have been required to sustain them and to allow them to come back in and continue to be strong and productive. We have to come up with models of expenditure, very carefully administered, to allow this funding to be had without it being a largesse and which does
A
not
giveaway,
solve the
yes.
that and we are already doing that. As I could tell you, the cabinet meets in retreat next week in Tobago for 3 days, and this is the kind of thing that we'll be focusing on. And there'll be certain shifts that we have to make. For example, right now in Trinidad and Tobago, much of government's revenues, we spend it on subsidies. And I know once you mention that, people begin to see, oh, hardships, because if you don't have these subsidies, you are going to have hardships. We need to be spared these hardships. But if we don't address these things, we end up requiring more and more of that kind of support, which is unproductive. I can't, if I ask you to cast your mind on the subsidies that we spend on fuel prices, it's about $30 billion that we spent subsidizing fuel in this country in recent years. And if one is to be honest now and ask ourselves, look at where we are at now. Suppose we had not done that and we had used most of that money either in savings or in doing other productive things, would we have been better off? Because we subsidize fuel for everybody in the country. You buy $1 million car and the state is subsidizing your fuel. Is that a good idea? And we have to address these things frontally and fairly and honestly. And we need, this pandemic is pushing us in that direction if we were not going there before, because there's no other way out. We have to do things differently. And there might be some disruption before, but we're hoping that as we do them, we would minimize those disruptions and the inconvenience and the hurt and build a new platform that gives our children a more confident future.
Are you going to change the pattern of expenditure? Because right now we spend 3% on development program, 16% on personnel, 10% on goods and services, 41% on transfers and subsidies, including the state enterprises, 20% on debt servicing, 10% on transfers to statutory and similar bodies. Well, will change that pattern of expenditure?
We have to, but it's the pace at which we're changing it that is going to be important.
Right.
What pace can we use? We have to. I mean, 41% on transfers and subsidies, that just cannot continue. Because if we do that, we will find ourselves budgeting always to spend money that we don't have. And that is not a good position to be in. And they say, you fish where there is fish to be caught. If we are to make significant improvements, those numbers that you just mentioned have to be adjusted in a way that the big ones are where you can make significant changes, but you have to do it with an understanding of the effects, and you soften the effects and you help the population to go from one place to another. When, like sometimes we are advised to budget on a balanced budget. That sounds good. I've heard people from the university giving that advice, that budget on a balanced budget. If you earn $10, only spend $10, and therefore you'll have no problem of deficit spending and so on. That is a good statement, but in reality, you're talking about how that action will affect lives all the way down to the unborn baby. So what we have to do and what we are looking at now is, what is the pace? Where do we initiate these changes? And at what pace do we go and we stay the course? We have confidence, or we ought to have confidence in what we are going to be doing, and we initiate those actions and stay the course. And that should take us to the location that we anticipate would be waiting on us if we stay that course and move us from this area, this precipice that you mentioned earlier on, to one where we can be more comfortably managing our business on a daily basis. So changes have to come, and there would be a conflict in that change, but without that change, there won't be any success. So unfortunately, that is the assignment of the government of the day, and we just have to do it.
And you will take whatever decisions are required in order to make that possible, taking into account that you've got to pace this because you've got to think about the impact on the society.
Well, I am quite prepared to take it because it's the job. It goes with the job. I mean, different people have different jobs. I mean, the mechanic who's looking after your car, he gets grease all over his hand and all over his clothes. And the fisherman is out there in the ocean, taking the broiling sun. And of course, if he falls in the water, he's going to get wet. We just have to, wherever we are located in this assignment, and we are all in this assignment, wherever we are, we just have to do what the job calls for in that location. The teachers have to teach, the doctors have to provide health care, the street cleaners have to clean the street and do it properly. And if we all do what we are required to do in our area of responsibility, we will come out of this in a much better way.
All right. We're going to have to be a lot more pointed in the answers as we go forward because of the stress of time. And I thank you for taking the time to spend with us, Prime Minister. But you know that the old economy, even if we revive it, is not going to be enough. We have a restructuring problem here to achieve, and we have a diversification agenda that we must pursue. And we need to decide on what that entails. The roadmap committee met. I think they gave some proposals, but I don't think in some ways they addressed the fact that we have to build a whole new economy. Now, I think when you appointed the roadmap committee, you, in fact, in your statement, pointed out the fact that one of the things that the committee had to do was to show the way to a new economy in order to allow us to survive. At that time, we were thinking past COVID. What would you say about this old economy, new economy challenge that we must face in the context of restructuring and diversification?
Well, I would like to ask for an appreciation that we're pretty much trying to build back and hopefully build back better, but we are living in the house while we are reconstructing it. So a lot of the old economy has to be preserved as the basis for going forward with a new economy. And that basically is what we are facing. And even if you think that we have not engaged this issue of the recovery, I just want to point out that we are not yet in the post-pandemic. The 2021 period is even more challenging than it was when we sat down to talk about the roadmap to recovery, because at that time we were hopeful that it would be not too long a period. Yes, but it is far from ending, and it is literally wearing us down. But we're staying the course, looking for the end of that period when we will kick in certain things. But in the meantime, we are engaging the things to do, where item number one is survival before we step out.
But Prime Minister, just to finish that point though, you know that the old economy, given the state of the energy sector in Trinidad and Tobago in both price and production, the old economy is not going to get us to growth and recovery. So we must do something else. Are you prepared to address that in your retreat and to come to the country with a set of proposals that can be actioned, let's say, during the course of the next year to begin the process?
Well, hopefully, we should be in a position to bring some of that to the table, but we cannot do without our current lifeblood. Let me just mention one thing. You see that Ruby feel that BHP is now producing about 5,000 barrels of oil from an aiming to go to 12,000.
Yes.
In 2018, I went to Australia for the specific purpose, among other things, of talking to BHP at their headquarters to make that investment in Trinidad and Tobago, when it was known to us that BHP was getting out of, and the world is aiming to get out of, as far as we are able to, producing more oil. And we desperately wanted BHP to make that investment as it was shedding those kinds of things in its portfolio and going back to its core business. Fortunately, they agreed to do it, and in the end made that $500 million investment on the Ruby field, which is now producing a significant amount of oil in Trinidad and Tobago. But we had to do that because that is the old economy that we had, and we had to use what we had. Had that investment not been made because we are required to abandon the old economy, then the benefits of what we're having now from that field wouldn't have been had, and we would not have had a substitute available. And that is the kind of circumstance that we are in. We got to get what we can get out of the old economy, but open up our minds to think and to absorb the new economy. And that is why we've created a Ministry of Digital Transformation, because that is the area in which we are going to have to make those new shifts to digitize our operations, to get the benefit from that, and to operate in that kind of environment.
How is that progressing, Prime Minister?
Well, everybody is enthusiastic, and the minister is settling in. We just on Thursday, cabinet agreed to the public service structure of it, and we are actively out there looking at finding our best and our brightest, many of whom will find their way their place in that ministry, to bring to us the decision making and the skills that are required to operate in this new kind of environment that both of us are talking about now.
All right. I must go to the issue of vaccines, Prime Minister, because without vaccination, I don't think we're going to have a good future here. And I just want to raise some of those issues. Why is there such a level of vaccine hesitancy, you think? I thought we would have been around 600,000 by now, but we only around 400 and something. And in Tobago, I mean, it's really bad. And you raised the issue of the Delta virus, the Delta variant yesterday. I mean, what is the problem you sense? I mean, you must have a sense of why this is happening. What is going on that we are not getting to the levels that we need to in terms of vaccination?
I think it's because we have a lot of people in the country who believe that this thing is not as serious as the government is saying. And there's a significant cacophony of voices that is taking that view, that this is being overplayed for ulterior motives by the government. And some people literally have to put their finger in the wound to feel it. And we have escaped the worst of what, the harbingers were. And people are believing that, they can get by without respecting the threat of the virus. And I'm really concerned and worried that it doesn't take a worsening of our situation for that cohort of the population that is uncooperative with this response to bring them to the position of saying, well, look, I really need to do this because the situation demands it. We're trying to convince people that it is not only you, but there's a national imperative. The nation is like a piece of cloth where every fiber has to be there unbroken for the cloth not to have a hole. And I'm hoping that we can convince more and more people that the response to the deadly virus in a pandemic, one is to accept that there's a threat of a deadly virus, and two, that the response is to strengthen yourself. That if and when the virus comes to you, you will be stronger, you'll be immunized to fight it off, and you will also be there not only for yourself, but for other people who you would not have infected or who you would stay alive for. I think these are the kinds of conversations that need to sink into those people who are not taking the threat seriously.
Will you take the example of other countries that government workers must be vaccinated because it is too high a risk to have vaccinated and unvaccinated in the same shared space? For instance, in other countries, they've done it for government buildings, government workers. They have done it for trains. They've done it for all kinds of things. Are we going to take that view at some point? I mean, we're giving the population time, it is true. They have 4 options with the vaccines, and they have an opportunity to manage this thing. I mean, are we going to take the view at some point that, look, we've got to get back to work?
Well, you know, earlier on, you did talk about dictatorship.
Right.
And it's interesting that you could have been talking about that. And now we're talking about the government being so um, relaxed in allowing the population to make those decisions that
Yes.
I'm now being asked whether, in fact, the government will use a heavy hand. Let me just say one thing. The government has a role and a responsibility in all these matters. And if it comes to the point where the reasonable decision is a government intervention to ensure that we get the best out of our response, then the government would be guilty of a dereliction of duty if it does not act.
Okay.
We are hoping, we are encouraging the population to do these things without the government having to hammer you into shape to do it. But for example, let's take the children. If it turns out that the school age population is not vaccinated because of all these conspiracy theories and these parents who are a little worried, as all parents are, it might very well be that the government will we have to run 2 parallel systems of schooling. One at home, virtual, and the other face to face. And of course, the parents will preserve their choice. But clearly, we have to preserve the population in the best way as advised by those who know more about this threat and the danger it poses in the medical sphere. So I wouldn't say on the public service just yet. We are still looking to see what the voluntary program is producing. And then if we have to take firmer decisions, we'll take it. For the time being, we'll get by with the voluntary program. But if it turns out that the population is at greater risk by not doing what the population is required to do, then there will be a role there for the government.
Okay, I'm going to interpret what you said, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, which is that right now we're on a voluntary program and we're trying to pursue it. Speaking for the government, I mean. You are speaking for the government and saying we're on a voluntary program and we're trying to persuade people and we hope good sense will prevail. But we are not prepared either in school or the workplace to have vaccinated and unvaccinated mix and therefore increase the risk of spread. And if it is necessary for the government to take governmental decisions as are necessary at some point in time for the protection of the health of the entire population, we will do it.
Well, I'm not saying that we're not prepared to do that, to have vaccinated and unvaccinated. It all depends on the level. You see, if you have a level, a high level of vaccinated in a population, wherever that group is, whether it is the school population, the defense force, the police service, the hospitals, if you have a high level of vaccinated people, then the science would tolerate unvaccinated people in that arrangement and not be overly risky. But if you have a low level of vaccinated and a high level of unvaccinated, then the science will show you that you have a huge risk and therefore you need to act to change that balance. So that is what I would say as against saying we're not prepared to tolerate. For example, if there's a high level of the school children at school being vaccinated, then one could tolerate a small level of unvaccinated teachers. But if you have a high level of unvaccinated teachers and a high level of unvaccinated students, and that is
The risk
your
is too high.
population, then you are asking for trouble.
Okay, I understand you. In the issue of the school, though, I mean, you want to phase this thing of getting the students back in the classroom, and you say fourth, fifth, and sixth forms. Can't we dedicate a week to vaccinate fourth, fifth, and sixth forms, and then 3 weeks later, because that is the time required for the Pfizer, vaccinate them again, so that by October we at least have fourth, fifth, and sixth forms in school?
That's one way of doing it, but what it means is that the other people who are not fourth, fifth, and sixth, who can get vaccinated now, will not be vaccinated then, and you want people to be vaccinated as quickly as possible. So we really vaccinated everybody who is willing to come forward now.
No, but there's a priority group, and I'm talking about just a week dedicated to that, just to get the ball rolling and start the school for those in examination forms.
Well, the report that I'm getting is that most of those who are being vaccinated now are that fourth, fifth, and sixth form people. So I think that is happening to a large extent. And we discussed as we get closer to the opening, when that is determined, we will actually have to go to those schools and do some further encouragement at the school. Hopefully, we would not rely only on that at that time. But the program is going along, and we are encouraging it. And I am hopeful that when the opening of school is determined to happen, that most parents would have seen their children vaccinated and going to accept what they have been missing for a year and a half. Those who determined that they would not participate in that, that would still be a free action, and they would probably be schooled at home. I see some parents say they prefer to homeschool their children rather than have them be exposed to that level of risk. I don't know that there are all these parents who can provide the level of homeschooling that is required as compared to. And of course, there's the benefit of having the students in the school in the schoolhouse as against having them home. So we are working this out without too much force and without too much disruption, and let's see what that turns up. But if the government has to act, the government will act.
I got the impression from everything that, not just today, but things that you've said in the past, that there are two things that, there is one thing that you'd like to see. Frontline workers like in the health sector, police, etc., efficiently and effectively vaccinated at a high percentage. And the second thing that I get from you is that, look, we don't want to go back to a lockdown. We are starting to open up the economy now. We want to open it up. But as you know, the vaccination rate is going to help determine that. And also the presence of the Delta variant might create a crisis situation if it does get into the population, which could basically upset everything. How are we going to get the population to understand that and keep the economy, the schools, etc., open, keep moving in that direction, and not go back to a situation where we have to lock down again? Because that will cripple everything.
Well, Bhoe, I mean, we can only transmit our thoughts through expressions of words and deeds. I mean, we keep the conversation in the country going that there is this threat, but you cannot convince people who set out not to be convinced. As I said early on, there's a significant number of people in this country who believe that this is not a real threat. And some people are listening to other voices that are supporting that point of view. You said if the Delta variant comes into our country, it might cause a problem for us. It's not a might, it surely will. And you only have to look at what happened in the United Kingdom, where they had a high level of vaccination. They had a huge level of Delta infection, but fortunately, the effects of the vaccination caused them not to have a huge level of death and hospitalization that they couldn't manage. It was the vaccination that caused them to be able to cope with that. If the Delta variant is rampant in a society where there is a low level of vaccination, it's not a question of might. It is going to be a disaster. And the lockdown that we've gone into, I see that as an investment that we have made to be in this position that we are in now. And I'm asking the population, let us not waste that investment by allowing ourselves to be overcome by another infection or an increased infection simply by becoming wary of what we have been doing and wanting to do otherwise, knowing that it will take us to a position where we would lose the gains that we have made and the investment that we have made.
Prime Minister, this is Independence time, and I know that you want to conquer the pandemic and embark on a rehabilitation and recovery process in the economy, and also reduce the stress levels that everybody is feeling. What would you say to this population as you leave? This is your final say. We're going to close afterwards. What would you say to this population as we leave and we enter and we commemorate the 59th anniversary of independence?
Well, firstly, I would say that we should acknowledge and be grateful for being citizens of this country. Trinidad and Tobago is a country located in a part of the world that is about the most comfortable to live in, even though we have our challenges with natural disasters and limited natural resources. So let us first and foremost be as patriotic as we can, be as appreciative as we can to call ourselves citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And also to appreciate that those who went before us did make some significant contribution and change our circumstance. I mean, the people of Tobago today can look in the port and see two of the best ferries in the world, which they own. But not too long ago, prior to at independence, we used to have to go around the island in a coastal steamer service because we did not have roads that took us from Scarborough to Charlottesville or from Scarborough to Roxborough. It was the coastal steamer was our highway around Tobago. The people of Trinidad must understand that there were times in this country when, as I experienced when I was in primary school and there was common entrance, only 4 children in my primary school had the opportunity to go to secondary school. Today we take it for granted that every child gets a place in secondary school. And we can now talk about things that we take for granted. But I would say that those things are the progress that we're making. I mean, we can talk about our unit trust. We can talk about the Heritage Petroleum, which is doing well right now. We can talk about our place in the world. After 59 years, we are a respected nation. Things are not as comfortable as they should be. But let us go forward, as our anthem say, with boundless faith in our destiny. There are going to be days or periods of time when we are called upon to come to the rampart to defend ourselves from the challenges of invaders, whether they be viruses or migrants who may come to us for help, even while we ourselves need help. So these are all part of the responsibilities of nationhood. So let's accept that, put 2 hands to the wheel, and make our contribution at the individual level and be proud at the national level.
Okay, thank you very much, Prime Minister, for this extended conversation. We're very, very happy to have you, and you are welcome anytime. And I want to say to you, happy independence. And for the sake of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, I wish you also good governance in the years ahead. This is Brighter Morning with Bhoe, and we're very happy to have had a collaboration with TTT to make this program and this conversation possible. We thank you for watching. We thank you for listening on 97.5 FM. And we thank you also for watching on MCTV, Multicultural TV. Prime Minister, is there anything you want to say before we go?
Happy independence to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Tough times don't last forever, but tough people do. We are tough people and we'll enjoy our independence, not only in 2021, but for all the years ahead.
All right. Thank you very much.